Let me ask you a question. If you had a race with someone, but as one of you fell further and further behind, the person ahead got slower as distance increased, would that be an enjoyable race? Chances are you'd say, I'm too socially incapable to be in a position where I'm racing someone. But for the rest of you, you'd probably say, no, after all, the ability of somebody else limits the ability of the other player, which isn't fun, but in single player racing games, this is a fairly common mechanic. It's called rubber banding, where the computer will go slower the further away the player is from them and faster if the player is ahead. It's used to try and increase tension in a race by making it always feel closer than it might be otherwise. It falsely sacrifices the actual ability of the AI in an attempt to make it so that the race's ability when compared to the AI counterpart seems fair. Rubber banding is very often a mechanic that's complained about consistently in an environment where it's implemented poorly, and a mechanic that goes undiscussed if it's implemented well. Rubber banding, when done well, is almost undeniably good. In the single player environment, rubber banding gives the player a game that adapts to their skills. The AI isn't going to give a scrub quotes worthy response when they get asked to slow down because the player doesn't know that they need to slow down before a turn. You add tension to a game and alter the skill gap by altering the abilities of those around you. Now let me ask you another question. Should rubber banding be implemented into a multiplayer environment? If you're playing a racing game that's intended to be a serious experience or a simulator, the answer is undoubtedly no. The game would be designed to be a display of skill, and to reduce the ability of those at the front and increase the ability of those at the back would contradict the goal and appeal of the title. But what if your game was aimed more for a casual audience, with the idea of it being a bit more of a laid-back experience or social experience, without the idea of the results being an accurate reflection of someone's ability? Rubber banding here would be bad. Still, not because it's bad to attempt to reduce the skill gap in an environment which is more casual or add tension irrespective to the two players' ability, but because you'd be doing so by removing someone else's ability to be skilled. But that doesn't mean that you can't strive towards making a more level playing field, even if artificially. Look at Mario Kart's attempt, where it gives you randomized items that empower those who are behind, with speed up items, invincibility, and things to attack those who are ahead. Those ahead are given items that have defensive applications, bananas, shells, the fucking coin. Alright, maybe it's not always a great display, but generally speaking, the items in Mario Kart tend to attempt to boost those who are behind ahead and allow those who are ahead to defend against the few items that are intended to take control away from the player. Mario Kart has the ideas of rubber banding, but instead of doing it with a mechanic that forces power away from a good player, it gives power to players who are further behind and puts players who are ahead in a position where they have to earn that power. Mario Kart takes the ideas of rubber banding, but shifts the perspective to better suit a multiplayer environment. To create a greater feeling of tension and reduce the skill gap, it creates a comeback mechanic. Admittedly, it is a little bit heavy-handed, but it suits the environment, and a comeback mechanic works wonders in this environment. But it seems to have been adopted into most fighting games, which typically tend towards being a more competitive and serious environment. And I have to wonder, are these comeback mechanics good for this type of competitive space? And my immediate answer would be no. You're dumb, I'm a genius, you won because of luck and bad game design. To put it ever so slightly more eloquently, it's not an accurate reflection of skill, and so shouldn't be put into a space that's deemed competitive. However, that's making an assumption that the environment that you're in is exclusively competitive, since in reality, every game exists on a spectrum from hyper-competitive to hyper-casual. And even though fighting games lean much harder towards the competitive end of the spectrum, we shouldn't ignore how comeback mechanics positively affect the more casual player base that will inevitably be the largest portion of the install base, without being the portion of the player base that puts the most time in. Before looking further, we should probably discuss how the comeback mechanic has to change in this environment to attempt to be better suited to its intended audience. After all, you can't take a game that's going to have a professional circuit and implement mechanics that slams two ends of the skill scale together. Instead, the goal of a comeback mechanic aims to allow for players who are further behind to gain small advantages that still give them a fighting chance, and adds tension to a game that's almost won, making them play through even the toughest of situations. This should make it so that there's more variance among the lower skilled players, but shouldn't be a large enough advantage that the variance carries over to the higher skilled players. Reason being is that the lower skill based player is likely to appreciate a victory regardless of whether it's earned or given, and in many situations won't even be able to tell the difference. A higher skilled player will want that victory to be earned, and will feel that the victory was taken under the circumstance that a mechanic made their opponent have to work less. Comeback mechanics should proceed to create the tension that rubber banding attempts to achieve, but by doing so in a way that doesn't remove the player's ability to perform. Now, I try to not use tournament footage in my videos, but since I keep up with Marvel's rhythm like a tap dancer to a metronome, if that tap dancer just so happened to have no limbs and was also comatose, I've used footage footage from VGBOOTCAMP and Team Spooky. Thank you very much for letting me use your stream footage, links in the description to both of their channels. While Marvel 3's X Factor is actually a choice rather than a mechanic exclusively available within low health, the intention for it to be used as a comeback mechanic is clear. Not only does your damage increase as your total team members go down, but also increases speed and prolongs the duration that that buff is active. Marvel's damage buff changes from character to character, but still ends up ranging somewhere between stepping on Lego and getting hit by a car going 80 miles per hour. This, for more casual players, is fantastic, as it allows for more variance between matches at lower levels. Two brothers who are at the same skill level without a proper grasp on the mechanics have many more matches that seem fair, even if one of them holds slightly more understanding than the other, which keeps both players engaged. However, the damage buffs, along with the speed buffs, the multiple points that it can be activated, and the duration of the buff make it so that at a high level, blow-ups are more frequent here than in Sonic fanfiction. Don't look that up, by the way. The extremely large damage buff combined with the duration of that buff means that if you're down to your last character, you have a very realistic chance of winning the match despite how many poor mistakes you've made to get to that point. The buff will likely last you so long that you can start fighting your opponent's team with them not being touched and end with the buff still being active even after you've killed the highest HP characters. You're also not going to have to make nearly as many decisions, since if you've got level 3 X Factor, you only have to touch your opponent once to end their life. This might sound like a lot of fun, and as a spectator it certainly is, but if you lost to a level 3 X Factor and that match decided whether or not you were going home with money in your wallet or not, you'd probably be happier getting mugged outside of the arcade as opposed to being robbed mid-match. Marvel's X Factor, while fantastic for more casual players, is intrusive to the enjoyment of higher level players by making it so that one good choice after successive bad choices has too large of a reward.
But, Leon, pointing out the flaws in a system has no use unless you're willing to provide a solution to a game you're never gonna touch from a development side.
Alright, fine then, that bastard Salami. This could be fixed, or at least significantly less frustrating at a high level, by reducing the amount of time that it's active for, or giving a hard limit on the amount of characters that it's active for. Kill 2 of them and it's gone, poof. You could also make it so that X Factor doesn't buff any moves that use super meter. This way you'd keep all of the important parts that X Factor brings to casual audiences without beating the competitive players over the head with emotional trauma. And while Marvel's comeback mechanic shows a severe over-tuning, Hellfire to me is a prime example of under-tuning. Hellfire and Guilty Gear Xrd is a mechanic that boosts the power of supers by 20% when you're below 20% health, which might sound like it's really strong. After all, you take a move which has its own fucking noun and boost it even further, but supers in Guilty Gear aren't as super as they may initially seem. It eats into a vital resource, most come at the end of the combo when the scaling is going to be taking the most effect, or acts as a mostly risky wake-up reversal. Since it only impacts supers, it doesn't really have any impact on decision making that wouldn't already be there at most levels. At a bottom level of play, it's almost entirely unnoticed, since the point that it kicks in happens so rarely without very immediately understandable benefits. At a high level of play, the only impact you'll really see it making is some very questionable high damage reversals, and very rarely end a round ever so slightly faster. Here I believe that the mechanic isn't impactful enough to be understood immediately, but also is incredibly underwhelming to the point where I would question its inclusion in the first place. Especially since Guilty Gear has the Gut system, which holds all of the goals of a comeback mechanic but flips it on its head. If the goal is to increase tension in a match through buffs and a comeback mechanic, Gear attempts to supply that tension by altering the way that information is presented. Guts makes it so that you take less damage as you receive more damage, so a combo at first looks like it does massive damage and the stakes of every interaction are high, but as you get further and further towards the end of your life bar, every combo starts doing a very small amount of damage. This helps to make it feel like you're always at the end of your life, when in reality the last 30% of your life bar is normally closer to about 50%. Now this doesn't help with the whole closing the skill gap and little Leon throwing a tantrum because he can't beat the big bad man, but at least supplies the emotional engagement that you're looking for with a casual audience without sacrificing the opportunities of high level play. There's also stuff in the system that I've skipped over, like how chip damage works in relation to Guts, and how at high level play sometimes you want to change your combo at the end of a round in relation to how it interacts with Guts, but none of these things, in my opinion, impact Guilty Gear in a way that is negative for the positives that it provides. Unlike Tekken 7's rage system, which is a fucking mess. If anyone's questioning why I've stopped playing Tekken 7, it's because I think that movement isn't emphasized enough. There's so many characters that it feels particularly bloated, making it so that I constantly feel a sense of overchoice, and rage drives and rage arts combined with standard rage are so impossibly frustrating to play against after an extended period of time. Keep in mind, however, if you're someone who's a bit more casual in their intention and not playing as seriously, this system is fantastic. It adds an absurd amount of variance among the casual player base, since at the lowest level it functions as a button to suddenly take 30% of someone's life when people are struggling to do more than 20. At the levels slightly above that, it becomes a way to make simple but effective combos go much further, and at the level ever so slightly above that previous one, it helps to feel like you've gained a sense of control over a game in a dire position. Rage Arts and Rage Drive help to give the player a sense of control and strength that the majority of fighting games demand of you. While I'm certainly not against systems that ask for mastery and understanding to get far, it's a nice way of making the player be given a glimpse of that power without asking them to invest potentially an hour into their first combo. Learning your first combo with any kind of consistency takes a really long time for people who aren't used to the genre, and so having a single button that gives you the satisfaction of a combo when you need it the most is a great way of avoiding that problem. And so while I personally hate this system, I must give props to the Tekken team for making a system that allows for casuals to feel in control and engaged, and think that Tekken 7 would be a worse game by removing Rage Arts. However, the problem is that Rage as a whole creates variance at even the highest levels of play, and the ways that it affects optimal damage makes for a game that feels like a simulation of a world where the only crime is theft of a life bar. Let me explain. In Tekken 7, a punish off of a move that leaves you really open is about 40% of your life. Some characters do a little bit more and some characters do a little bit less. With Rage alone, you only add about an extra 10% to some of the moves that you do. It kind of varies, but by itself it's fine. In fact, by itself I think it's good, because it makes pokes more effective and in turn makes for a game that has small consistent play and high risk play be about as meaningful in reward. The problem starts to come when you combine the positive qualities together with the fact that Rage allows you to make any combo do an additional 10 damage with Rage Arts. This makes the previously good 40% combos become 50% or more, which means that if you've been playing and you've had even the slightest amount of exchanges between the two of you, both of you are now drawn back into a life-threatening situation off of a clean combo or a stray counter hit, or you just wanted to sidestep an electrics track to both sides. It's fine, who cares? And because of the way that the armor works, it means that if you just assume that somebody is going to press a button, you can win. All of that important decision making, just fuck it, just throw it out the window. You think it's gonna happen? Let's find out. Yeah, but if you block, you punish it, so who cares? Shut the fuck up, me. Do you not see how the risk reward here is entirely lopsided? If they guess wrong, they die, which sounds like it's really fucking dangerous, but when you take into account the fact that any high risk decision is going to kill them regardless, and the fact that you can't stop a rage art midway through, makes it so that the decision making becomes, are they going to press, and not what are they going to press? Why are they going to press it? When are they going to press it? Not to mention Rage Drives, which in their quality ranges from good for casuals but isn't used in competitive play, to why did they give you a move that's on par with the fastest universal move but it full launches and leaves you at advantage if it's blocked anyway, so regardless you win. These combined make for a mechanic that is simply too versatile and is only accessible due to poor decision making. In Rage, while you don't have a life lead, many characters will benefit from Rage so much that they're actually advantaged, since the smallest engagements that they win will provide them with a boost that is meaningful yet fair, but in the largest engagements they stand a real chance of winning the round from playing half of it. Some of you might want to point out how it adds depth to decision making, since you don't want to win any engagements in a way that puts your opponent in rage. My problem comes in the fact that it's simply not fun to play against. I don't care if the mechanic in question adds enough depth to rival the Mariana Trench. If it creates a less enjoyable environment, I'm going to stop playing. But if I'm being totally honest, I'm not sure what I would change about this system without making an entirely new one, since the current system benefits the casual audience so much that you'd be removing the net fun of the game by taking it away. But that doesn't excuse the extreme frustration that it causes at a more competitive level. If X Factor is rubber banding by making your car go double the speed and also turning it into a fucking plane because you're 5 seconds behind, and Hellfire is like increasing your acceleration when you're already going at top speed, Tekken 7's rubber banding is making the player only able to turn right for a lap on a track that is exclusively made of left turns. Big funny haha when it's just you and your mates, but when you took a flight to the Netherlands and it stopped you from getting out of pools, I think you've got the right to be pissed. For as much as I've shit on comeback mechanics here, it's important that developers find ways to keep new players engaged and keep the game both tense and uncertain to give us the emotional engagement that we're looking for, while also keeping the competitive integrity in check without it being frustrating. Personally, I don't think that there's a comeback mechanic in any of the fighting games that I've played that do this effectively, but systems like Guts and Guilty Gear might be a step in the right direction. Perhaps it's not that we need to change the systems of the games to provide this experience, but instead the way that we present the information to supply the engagement that we're looking for. What I think is important to a player is to feel engaged by feeling a sense of tension, rather than provide them with a win through systems that they don't understand, and so I feel like most fighting games would benefit from seeing if they can achieve the emotions that comeback mechanics provide through alternative means. Pee pee poo poo, I promise I'm working on a video as good as Jump Arcs, it might just be a while, bye!